They called it Briarwood Lane, a quiet, unremarkable street on the edge of a small Midwestern town. In the 1940s, it was the kind of place where nothing ever made the newspaper: tree-lined sidewalks, identical houses, families who knew each other well enough to borrow sugar without knocking. And then, one morning, every family on that street was gone. It was discovered just after sunrise. A milkman named Harold Keene noticed something was wrong when he reached the corner of Briarwood Lane and didn't see a single person waiting for their bottles. No doors opened. No curtains moved. The street felt paused. Harold knocked on the first house. No answer. He tried the handle. The door opened. Inside, the dining table was set for breakfast. Plates of eggs had gone cold. Coffee cups sat half full. A chair was pushed back as if someone had stood up in a hurry. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood. No broken furniture. Just absence. Thinking it was a medical emergency or some kind of gas leak, Harold ran to the next house. Same thing. Unlocked door. Food left out. Beds slept in. Clothing laid out for the day. By the time the police arrived, the entire street had been checked. 32 people. Gone. Cars were still parked in driveways. Pets were left behind, confused and hungry. A baby carriage stood on one porch, rocking gently in the morning breeze. The sheriff, a man named Walter Finch, ordered the area sealed off. His first assumption was evacuation, maybe a factory accident, something the rest of town hadn't been warned about yet. But no sirens had sounded, no records existed, and no other streets were affected. Only Briarwood Lane. Investigators found something even stranger as the day went on. Every clock inside the houses had stopped at the same exact minute. 3:17 a.m. Not broken. Not out of power. Simply stopped. People began whispering before sundown. Some said the families had been taken by the government. Others said it was a mass hallucination, that maybe those people had never existed at all. But birth certificates, school records, photographs, and church logs proved they were real. They just weren't there anymore. That night, a pair of deputies volunteered to stay on the street. They parked at opposite ends, headlights off, engines cold. The town wanted answers. Sometime after 3 a.m., Deputy Mason reported hearing something over the radio. Not a voice, more like movement. Footsteps. Dozens of them. All at once. He stepped out of his car and called down the street. No reply. Then the sound stopped. The deputies later said the silence afterward felt wrong. Thick, almost pressurized. Like the air itself was holding its breath. At 3:17 a.m., both of their radios emitted a brief burst of static. And then nothing else happened. By morning, they were both found sitting in their patrol cars, shaken but unharmed. Neither one could explain what they'd heard. Neither one agreed to ever return to Briarwood Lane. Over the next week, federal agents arrived. They combed the area, questioned the town, took photographs, and packed up several boxes of evidence no one ever saw again. Eventually, they told the mayor the same thing they told everyone else. There was no danger. The houses were boarded up. Families from nearby streets were offered money to move. Most did. Within a year, Briarwood Lane was abandoned. But the story didn't end there. In the early 1960s, a local historian named Ruth Callahan decided to dig through Old Town archives for a book she was writing. She found references to the incident, but not where she expected. Newspapers from 1940 mentioned it briefly. Then they stopped. But church records went further back. In the late 1800s, the same street had a different name. And according to those records, an entire street of families vanished back then too. Same number of people. Same lack of evidence. Same time on the clocks. 3:17 a.m. Ruth noticed something else. The street had been renamed and rebuilt multiple times over the decades. Fires. Storms. Urban renewal. Each time new families moved in. And each time, roughly every 50 years, the street emptied again. The final entry Ruth found was written by a pastor in 1891. His handwriting grew shaky near the end. He wrote that the night before the disappearance, several residents had complained of strange dreams. All of them described standing in their homes, unable to move, watching their doors slowly open on their own. They all described someone, or something, waiting outside. Not forcing its way in. Just waiting. Ruth never published her book. 2 months after finishing her research, she disappeared while driving through the outskirts of town. Her car was found parked near where Briarwood Lane used to be. The keys were still in the ignition. The seat was warm, and the dashboard clock was stopped at 3:17 a.m. Today, Briarwood Lane doesn't exist on maps. The land is empty. No houses. No road. Just a narrow strip of grass the town refuses to sell. Older residents won't walk there after dark. Because sometimes very late at night, people swear they hear doors opening and footsteps moving all at once, down a street that isn't there anymore. The orphanage sat at the edge of the city, tucked behind a line of neglected eucalyptus trees, where the road thinned and the streetlights stopped working. Officially, it was called St. Calder's Home for Youth Development. Unofficially, locals called it the place where children never grew up. For decades, the facility was government-funded, audited on paper, and praised in brief press releases. It took in children from everywhere, runaways, wards of the state, kids whose parents vanished or signed papers they didn't understand. St. Calder's never lacked residents. There was always room for one more bed. What it lacked were graduates. No one questioned that at first. Orphanages, people reasoned, were temporary stops. Kids got adopted. They got moved. They fell through bureaucratic cracks. That was normal. What wasn't normal was that, after more than 30 years of operation, not a single former resident could be found who had lived there past the age of 16. The discovery didn't come from an investigation. It came from a routine data transfer. An archivist named Miriam Locke, assigned to digitize old social services files, noticed a pattern that felt wrong. Names repeated across decades. Entry dates recorded carefully. Exit dates missing or replaced with vague notes like transferred or reassigned. No receiving institutions listed. No follow-ups. No adult records tied to any of them. At first, Miriam assumed corruption. Lost files. Sloppy record-keeping from another era. But the deeper she looked, the stranger it became. Every child admitted to St. Calder's arrived before the age of 9. And every single one vanished from the system before turning 16. The youngest documented departure was 12. The oldest was 15 years and 11 months. No exceptions. Miriam flagged the anomaly and passed it up the chain. The response came back swift and sterile. Case closed. Records incomplete due to administrative restructuring. She was told to move on. She didn't. Curiosity turned into obsession. Miriam started visiting neighborhoods around the old orphanage, asking longtime residents what they remembered. At first, people claimed ignorance, then hesitation, then unease. An elderly shop owner across the road from the property finally spoke. They were quiet kids, he said. Too quiet. Never saw them play outside. Just walking in lines. Watching. And every few years, a funeral van would come at night. He paused before adding, but no one ever said who it was for. Former night shift security guards told similar stories. Lights on in the East Wing after midnight. Bells ringing without being touched. Children standing in hallways, staring, not speaking, until dawn. One guard quit after hearing singing from the basement. Children's voices. Soft. Counting. I went down once, he admitted. I never went back. The orphanage officially closed in the late 1990s, citing budget cuts. The building was boarded up and left to rot. No demolition. No redevelopment. Just silence. Until trespassers started going missing. Police reports described broken locks and scattered flashlights near the property. Sometimes a shoe. Sometimes a backpack. Never a body. What brought St. Calder's back into public consciousness was a single notebook discovered in a condemned records office years later. No cover. No author's name. Just careful looping handwriting. It belonged to a boy named Elliot Ward, admitted to the orphanage in 1978 at age 7. The notebook wasn't a diary, not exactly. It read more like observations. Rules. Warnings. Don't ask why the bells ring. Don't go into the East Wing after lights out. If they call your name, pretend you're asleep. Halfway through, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew jagged. They say 16 is too old. They say we stop being useful. Elliot wrote about tests. Not medical ones, behavioral. Watching how children reacted to isolation. Fear. Silence. Guilt. Love. Obedience. He wrote about a room below the building where the walls were marked with height lines, crossed out as children disappeared. He wrote about the sound, a low vibration that made teeth ache and thoughts feel heavy, like something pressing from the inside of the skull. On the last page, dated 2 days before Elliot would have turned 16, there was a single line. Tomorrow they let me see the others. The final revelation came quietly. A journalist comparing satellite imagery of the property across decades noticed something that records never mentioned. The orphanage had expanded underground. Every few years, the foundation shifted. New earth displaced. Ventilation added where no rooms were listed. Below St. Calder's was another structure, older than the orphanage itself. When authorities finally authorized a limited excavation, they found a sealed chamber beneath the east wing. Inside were rows of narrow benches, chains bolted to the floor, and on the far wall, etched deep into concrete, hundreds of names. Every child ever admitted. Every name scratched through at 16. Except one. At the bottom, carved deeper than the rest, untouched by a line, was a name added decades after the orphanage closed. Not Elliot Ward. Not a child from the system. It belonged to one of the missing trespassers. Which is when officials quietly stopped the excavation. Because St. Calder's wasn't a place where children died. It was a place where something learned from them. And it was still growing. The train station had a name once. People used it every day without thinking about it. On tickets, on schedules, on quick texts like, I'll meet you at ___ at 6. It sat between 2 major stops on a busy commuter line, old but functional, humming with life from early morning until well after dark. And then one night it stopped existing. At least, that's what the maps say. Before it vanished, the station was known for being slightly off. Regular commuters noticed it first. The lights were always a little too dim, even after renovations. The announcements echoed longer there, stretching unnaturally, as if the tunnels themselves were repeating the words after the speakers went silent. And clocks, every single clock on the platform, ran about 3 minutes behind the rest of the city. Not enough to miss a train, just enough to unsettle you if you noticed. One of the last people confirmed to have used the station was a university student named Daniel. He commuted late because of his part-time job, usually catching the last or second-to-last train home. His friends said he hated that station. He claimed the platform felt longer at night, like it stretched while you walked, and that sometimes he'd hear footsteps behind him that never caught up. Still, it was the fastest way home. So he kept using it. The night everything went wrong was a Tuesday. Rain hammered the city hard enough to flood the streets, and delays rippled across the transit system. Daniel's train was almost empty when it finally slowed near his stop. According to the conductor, the brakes engaged longer than usual, screeching as if the rails resisted stopping there. When the doors opened, only Daniel stepped out. Security footage from inside the train shows him pausing at the doorway, hesitating. He leaned back inside and asked the conductor something. No audio survived, but the conductor later said Daniel asked, "Is this the right station?" The conductor told him yes. The doors closed. The train pulled away. Daniel never exited the station. At least, not where anyone could see. The platform cameras were wiped between 1:12 a.m. and 1:47 a.m. A clean gap, no glitches before or after. The only surviving footage came from a maintenance camera at the far end of the station, one that pointed toward a sealed service tunnel rarely used by the public. It showed Daniel standing alone on the platform. At first, nothing happens. He checks his phone, paces, rubs his hands together against the cold. Then, faintly, another figure appears down the platform. Just a silhouette, distorted by distance and poor lighting. The figure doesn't walk toward him. It just stands there. Daniel notices it after about 30 seconds. His posture changes immediately. He straightens, steps back, and lifts his phone as if pretending to make a call. The figure remains motionless. Then, the lights above the platform begin switching off. Not all at once, one by one, starting from the far end. Each light clicks out with a delay between them, marching slowly toward Daniel. He backs away. The footage stutters at this point. When it stabilizes again, Daniel is no longer alone. There are shapes behind him now. Several. Hard to describe, tall, uneven silhouettes that don't quite match human proportions. They stand close, too close, but Daniel doesn't turn around. He stares straight ahead at the dark end of the platform. At exactly 1:47 a.m., the screen goes black. Daniel was reported missing the next morning. His phone last pinged near the station, but only briefly. By the time transit police arrived, they found something strange. The platform signs no longer displayed the station's name. Instead, they showed the names of the stations before and after it, alternating every few seconds as if confused. By noon, the signs were blank. Transit authorities closed the station temporarily for investigation. Commuters were told trains would skip the stop until further notice. At first, people complained. The station was busy, important, convenient. But then maps began updating. First, online route planners stopped showing the station. Then digital kiosks. Then printed schedules replaced it with a blank space, the line stretching smoothly as if no stop had ever existed there. Employees were instructed not to talk about it. Conductors were warned they'd be fired if they mentioned its name on record. Maintenance crews sent inside reported disorientation, nausea, and missing time. One technician claimed he walked down a hallway that looped back onto itself, passing the same emergency exit sign 6 times before finding his way out. The station was sealed off completely within a week. Years passed. Daniel's case went cold. Most people forgot, except for the occasional commuter who swore they felt a train slow down between stops, just for a moment before picking up speed again. Or those who glanced out the window late at night and thought they saw a lit platform where none should be. One night, a subway operator broke protocol. He was new, young, unaware of the unspoken rules. During a late shift, his train jolted unexpectedly between stations, alarms flashing briefly before resetting. Against instructions, he radioed Central Control and asked if there was a reason they'd slowed near an unused platform. The response came back sharp and immediate. Do not stop. He didn't plan to. He only glanced out of habit. And that's when he saw it. A fully lit platform. Clean. Restored. Crowded. Dozens of people stood waiting, dressed in outdated clothing. Styles from different decades overlapping wrong. Some faced the tracks. Others stared directly at the train, faces pale, eyes wide, mouths slightly open as if mid-sentence. One boy stood at the edge. The operator recognized him immediately from the missing person flyers that still circulated online. Daniel raised his hand. Not to wave. To knock. The sound carried through the cab. A dull, hollow thud, as if something inside the tunnel had struck the side of the train from the other side of the wall. The operator screamed and accelerated, ignoring every warning signal until the platform vanished behind him. He reported the incident. By morning, he was reassigned. That same week, all internal transit documents referencing the station were deleted. Archived footage disappeared. Even whistleblowers found their files corrupted, emails wiped clean. But stories still circulate among night workers. They say the station doesn't appear on maps because it doesn't sit fully in the city anymore. Something happened during that final incident. Something that turned the platform into a threshold rather than a place. And sometimes, when a train is delayed for no clear reason, when the lights flicker between stations, when the air pressure shifts and the tunnel seems to breathe, the train is slowing down, not because of a signal, but because something is still waiting there. For years, the playground sat in the center of the neighborhood like a promise. It wasn't fancy, just swings that creaked in the wind, a faded slide, and a patchy soccer field where grass refused to grow evenly. Parents liked it because it felt safe. It was open, visible. Children screamed and laughed there from morning until dusk, their shoes pounding the dirt into something hard and compacted. No one questioned why the soil was always darker there. It wasn't until the city approved a renovation, new equipment, deeper foundations, that anyone started digging beneath the playground. And once they did, everything stopped. The first sign was the smell. Workers initially thought it was a dead animal. That wasn't unusual. But as the excavator pulled up another layer of earth, the stench deepened, old, sour, heavy, like something that had been trapped for a very long time. One of the men jumped down into the pit with a shovel, expecting to clear whatever was rotting beneath the surface. Instead, he struck something solid that didn't sound like rock. He brushed away dirt with his glove and froze. A curved, yellowed shape stared back at him. Bone! At first, the supervisors assumed it was a single burial. Maybe an old coffin from before the area was developed. They called it in, followed protocol, and cordoned off a small section of the playground with bright orange tape. Parents stood nearby, watching with casual interest. Kids complained that recess was shortened. Someone joked about ghosts. Then they found another skeleton. And another. The excavation expanded. The tape widened. The laughter faded. Within 2 days, the entire playground was sealed off. Police stood watch. Reporters gathered at the edge of the field, filming the swings swaying behind them, still moving even though no one was there. By the end of the week, investigators confirmed what no one wanted to say out loud. It wasn't a grave. It was a mass burial. Dozens of remains lay beneath the playground, stacked, overlapping, incomplete. Some skeletons were small. Some were missing hands. Others had fractures that never healed. There were no headstones. No markers. No records. The land had never officially been a cemetery. That was the problem. Local historians were brought in, digging through property documents and faded maps. The neighborhood, it turned out, was built over land that changed ownership several times during a period no one liked to talk about. A period marked by forced relocations, detention camps, unrest that never made it into school textbooks. There were whispers of an unnamed event, something quietly erased. A time when people disappeared overnight, when reports were altered, when bodies were never returned to families. No one could prove it, but the bones could. For parents in the neighborhood, the discovery triggered a different kind of horror. They began replaying memories in their minds. The way the soil sometimes pushed up after heavy rain. The odd objects their children dug up, smooth stones, bits of metal, fragments no one could identify. The fact that grass never grew properly near the old swing set. Some parents remembered their kids coming home with dirt-stained shoes and strange stories. One mother recalled her son asking why the ground felt soft, like it was breathing. At the time, she laughed. Now she couldn't sleep. The playground was permanently closed. Plans were announced to memorialize the site, though no one seemed sure how to honor victims whose names had been erased. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't, because after the digging stopped, people began noticing something else. Children who had spent years playing there were having the same nightmares. Different houses, different families, same dreams. They described standing in the playground at night, alone. The swings moving without wind, the ground beneath them trembling slightly, as if something below was trying to rise. Some said they heard muffled crying. Others talked about hands pressing up through the dirt, not breaking the surface, just pushing, testing. One child drew a picture at school that made the teacher quietly excuse herself from the classroom. It showed stick figures standing above a large rectangle underground. Every figure below had its mouth open. Parents dismissed it as shared panic. Trauma exposure. Something picked up from the news. Until a boy who had moved away years earlier called his mother in tears. He told her he dreamed of the playground for the first time in years. In his dream, he wasn't a child. He was lying beneath it. The city eventually released a statement. They acknowledged the remains but avoided specifics. No official event was named. No apology issued. The story was framed as an unfortunate historical oversight. Then, just as quietly as it began, media coverage faded. What couldn't be buried was covered instead. Grass grew back over the site, thicker than before. Too thick. Neighbors noticed it grew faster there than anywhere else, lush and dark, no matter the season. Maintenance crews trimmed it constantly, but it always returned within days. And at night, when the streets were empty, some residents swore they could hear sounds drifting from the field. Not voices. Movement. A slow, shifting noise beneath the soil, as if something long compressed was settling or waking. Years later, a memorial plaque was installed at the edge of the playground. It reads, "May the forgotten be remembered." There are no names beneath it, just blank space. Children are not allowed to play there anymore. But sometimes, late in the evening, footprints appear in the grass anyway. Small ones, pressed deep into the earth, as if whatever made them was very heavy. And whatever lies beneath the playground is still there, waiting. No one noticed the blackout at first. It began on a Wednesday night in a quiet residential district on the edge of the city. The kind of neighborhood where most houses looked the same, porch lights stayed on till morning, and nothing ever made the news. At exactly 9:17 p.m., every light went out at once. Street lamps, homes, traffic signals at both ends of the district. Even the distant glow from nearby shops vanished. An entire neighborhood went dark in a single moment. At first, people assumed it was routine. A power failure. A blown transformer. Someone probably already calling the electric company. A few residents stepped onto their porches, phones glowing in their hands, squinting into the dark for signs of movement. Then the phones lost signal. Not just slow service. No bars. No data. Even emergency calls wouldn't connect. Still no panic. Not yet. Blackouts happen sometimes. Storms rolled through. Old infrastructure failed. People waited. And waited. What came next is the part that almost no one remembers. Except for 5 people. According to the utility company, the outage lasted just under 4 hours. Power was restored at 1:06 a.m. Their logs were clean. No tampering. No overload. No recorded fault large enough to explain the total blackout. When the lights came back on, most residents were already asleep. They woke the next morning annoyed but unconcerned. Clocks blinked 12 o'clock. Refrigerators hummed back to life. People went to work. No one talked about it. Until one woman did. Her name was Marlene Ives, a retired school secretary who lived near the center of the district. The morning after the blackout, she went to her neighbor's house, pale and shaking, and asked a question that didn't make sense. "Did you hear the knocking?" she asked. The neighbor laughed it off. Said she'd slept through the night. Probably tree branches. Or kids. Marlene didn't laugh. She said the knocking had come from inside her house. Room to room. Slow. Deliberate. She said every clock had stopped at 9:17. Her radio turned itself on, but only played static. And when she tried to open her front door, the knob wouldn't turn, as if someone were holding it from the other side. The neighbor suggested stress. A bad dream. Maybe she should rest. Marlene stopped talking about it after that. 3 days later, a man named Joel Ramirez posted something strange on a local forum. Just one sentence. "Did anyone else lose time during the blackout?" The post got almost no replies. One person joked about falling asleep early. Another blamed alcohol. The thread would have died completely if a woman named Denise hadn't replied with 2 words. "I remember." That was when the pattern started. 5 residents, no more, no less, began privately messaging each other. None of them knew why they remembered. None of them had anything obvious in common. Different ages. Different streets. Different routines. But their memories overlapped in ways that made them uncomfortable. All 5 remembered the silence first. Not just the absence of sound, but pressure. As if the neighborhood itself had been sealed shut. No insects. No wind. No distant traffic. Even their own breathing sounded wrong, muffled, like it didn't belong in the air. 3 of them remembered the same thing next. Movement in the street. Not footsteps. Not vehicles. Shadows. Tall ones. They remembered standing at windows they didn't recall walking to. Curtains already pulled back. Watching shapes glide beneath the dead streetlights. Not rushing. Not hiding. Just moving with purpose. Denise said she recognized her own street. but it looked rearranged. Houses slightly farther apart. Driveways longer. Lawns stretching deeper than they should have. As if the neighborhood had been copied from memory, imperfectly. Joel remembered something worse. He remembered voices. Not talking. Counting. Low and steady. Coming from everywhere at once. 1, 2, 3. He said when the counting reached 11, every porch light in the district flicked on at the same time, even though the power was still out. And that's when the knocking started. Not on doors. On walls. Marlene said it moved clockwise through her house. 1 knock per room. Like something checking inventory. When it reached her bedroom wall, the sound came from inches away. She remembered praying. Not for protection, but to be overlooked. The most disturbing account came from the 5th person, a college student named Eric who lived with his parents. He remembered being outside. None of the others did. Eric said he didn't remember choosing to leave his house. He was just there, standing in the middle of the road with dozens of others. Neighbors, families, children, all of them silent. All of them facing the same direction. Toward the park. He said there were figures standing at the tree line. Too tall, too still. And every time the counting paused, one of the neighbors would step forward. Just one. And not come back. Eric said when the lights snapped on, he was alone in the street. Lying on the asphalt. Power humming like nothing had happened. His parents swore he'd been in bed all night. None of this was reported. No police logs. No emergency calls. No security footage. Every camera in the district recorded black screens from 9:17 to 1:06. The 5 residents tried comparing notes. Tried finding proof. But the more they talked, the harder it became to remember details. Faces blurred. Street names slipped away. Even their written notes felt wrong when reread, like they'd been edited. Within a month, 2 of them moved away without explanation. 1 stopped responding entirely. Marlene was found wandering her block one night, knocking gently on strangers' walls. She couldn't explain why. The forum thread disappeared. Today, the neighborhood looks normal. Families live there. Kids play in the park. Streetlights flicker on every evening like clockwork. But if you ask long-term residents about the blackout, they'll tell you the same thing. They don't remember anything unusual. They'll say the power must have gone out for a bit. They'll shrug, and then they'll change the subject. Because sometimes late at night, when the wind dies and the street goes unnaturally quiet, a few houses still hear it. 1 slow knock, moving room to room, counting, and stopping just long enough to see who remembers. The school sat at the edge of a farming town, so small it barely appeared on maps. 2 long gravel roads intersected nearby, and beyond that, nothing but fields, fences, and the distant outline of trees that locals swore were older than the town itself. For decades, the building had been a constant. 1-story brick, narrow windows, a flagpole out front that squeaked in the wind. Everyone in town either went there, taught there, or had a reason to drive past it every morning. That's why people noticed immediately when it closed. But no one talks about the closure notice or the budget meeting that followed. They talk about what happened on the final morning before the doors were locked for good. It started with attendance. The teacher was a woman named Mrs. Calder. She had been teaching 4th grade for nearly 20 years and was known for being strict in small ways. Perfectly aligned desks, sharpened pencils before lessons, attendance taken the exact same way every day. She believed routine kept things from falling apart. That morning felt wrong from the moment she walked in. The hallway lights flickered longer than usual, buzzing before settling into a dull glow. The school was quiet in a way that didn't match the schedule. No lockers slamming, no laughter echoing down the halls. Just the hum of electricity and the faint creak of the building shifting. Mrs. Calder unlocked her classroom and paused. The desks were already occupied. Not all of them, but enough to make her stop at the doorway. Jackets were draped over chairs. Backpacks leaned against table legs. A few desks had notebooks open, pencils resting neatly across lined pages. She counted. 28 desks. That was the class size listed on her roster. But only 22 students were enrolled that semester. She told herself someone must have wandered in early. Older siblings waiting out the cold. Kids from another class killing time before the bell. It happened occasionally. Still, she felt uneasy as she set her purse down. When the bell rang, students filed in slowly. Familiar faces. Muddy shoes. Sleepy eyes. 22 of them, exactly. They took their seats without comment, as if nothing were out of place. Mrs. Calder stood at the front of the room and opened her attendance book. She cleared her throat. "All right," she said, glancing up. "Let's begin." She started at the top of the list. Names were called. Hands raised. Voices answered here. Everything felt normal, until it wasn't. Midway through, she called a name she didn't recognize. There was no pause. No confusion. A child in the back row raised their hand. "Here." Mrs. Calder looked up sharply. She didn't recognize the student. The child was pale, dressed in outdated clothing, a buttoned sweater, dark slacks that stopped above the ankle. The face was expressionless, eyes fixed forward. Mrs. Calder hesitated, then marked the name present. She told herself it was a transfer student she hadn't been notified about. Then she called the next unfamiliar name. Another hand went up. Then another. By the end of the roll call, every name on the page had answered. 28 responses. The room was silent. Mrs. Calder slowly lifted her gaze and counted the heads in front of her. There were more students now. Not crowded. Not obviously wrong. Just fuller. New faces sat among the others, perfectly still. None of the children seemed disturbed. No whispers. No glances. They stared ahead, waiting. Mrs. Calder closed the attendance book. She taught the lesson. Or tried to. As the morning went on, strange details began to pile up. The unfamiliar students never spoke unless spoken to directly. When they did, their voices sounded distant, flat, as if echoing from somewhere else. They knew the answers to questions, but never raised their hands first. During reading time, Mrs. Calder walked the rows. She noticed the names written on the papers. They matched the attendance book. Names that hadn't appeared on any enrollment form. Names no parent had ever claimed. During recess, the other children avoided the newcomers. They clustered on one side of the playground, whispering. One student finally spoke to the teacher. "They don't cast shadows," the child said quietly. Mrs. Calder turned toward the windows. Clouds covered the sun. The playground was gray and dull. "There's no shadows today," she replied. The child shook their head. "Yesterday there were." When the bell rang to signal the end of the day, Mrs. Calder felt relief, so sharp it almost hurt. She dismissed the class early and stood alone in the room afterward, staring at the desks. Only 22 were occupied now. The others were empty. No jackets. No backpacks. No sign anyone had ever been there. That evening, she reported the incident to the principal. He laughed it off. Suggested stress, imagination, maybe a roster error. But the next morning, attendance was taken again. And again, more names answered than students enrolled. By the third day, other teachers noticed it too. A kindergarten teacher swore she heard voices during nap time, whispering from empty mats. A history teacher found essays turned in by students who had never existed. Parents began calling. Their children complained of classmates who appeared and vanished. Some said they were being followed home, footsteps matching theirs on empty roads. One child refused to return, sobbing that the quiet kids sat at the foot of his bed at night, repeating his name. The school board ordered an inspection. Records were pulled. Old yearbooks emerged from storage. That's when they noticed the pattern. The extra names matched students who had died over the past 70 years. Accidents. Illnesses. Farm machinery. A fire in the 1950s that had taken 3 children when the building was still made of wood. Every unfamiliar name from the attendance book appeared in the margins of history, frozen in black and white photographs. Smiling. Sitting in classrooms that no longer existed. The decision to close the school was made quietly. No announcement. No ceremony. On the final day, Mrs. Calder arrived early. She found her attendance book waiting on her desk. It was open. A new page had been added. At the top, written in careful handwriting, was her name. When the building was demolished months later, workers reported something unsettling. Behind one of the brick walls, sealed off decades earlier, they found a chalkboard. Names covered it, some crossed out, some circled. At the bottom, freshly written in white chalk, was a single line. Present. They called it a celebration of history. Once every decade, the town of Greyhaven held a weekend-long festival to honor its founding. Banners went up along the main road. Old songs were practiced in the community hall. People traveled in from nearby towns, filling hotels and guest houses weeks in advance. It was meant to be loud, colorful, nostalgic. The kind of thing families brought cameras to. No one talked about what happened after the last festival. Not openly. Most people didn't even know there was anything to talk about. The incident didn't make the news. It didn't appear in police blotters or court records. But for a few hours on the final night of the celebration, more than 70 people were detained by authorities, then quietly released before sunrise. And every single one of them was warned that if they spoke about what they'd seen, they would be imprisoned. The festival followed the same routine every time. A daytime parade, historical reenactments in the town square. At sunset on the final night, a heritage walk led participants to the old quarry just outside town, where the founders were said to have first settled. The walk was optional, but somehow the same people always ended up going. This time, the crowd was bigger than usual. College students, tourists, couples, families who'd moved away and come back just for the weekend. Volunteers handed out lanterns with electric candles and pamphlets explaining the symbolic ritual they'd witness at the quarry. No one read the pamphlets closely. As the sun went down, the group followed a dirt path through the trees. Cell service dropped about halfway in, which people joked about. Someone said it felt like a horror movie. Another person laughed and said that was the point. The quarry opened up suddenly, a wide bowl of stone carved into the earth. Wooden platforms had been set up in a circle at the bottom, with a single structure in the center, covered by a thick canvas tarp. Organizers guided people down carefully, telling them to stand behind rope lines. A few local officials stood nearby, wearing old-fashioned coats to match the historical theme. That was when things started to feel off. The organizers weren't smiling. They kept counting the crowd, whispering to each other, adjusting lantern placement again and again, even though the area was already well lit. One volunteer pulled a man back when he stepped too close to the rope. Not gently. When the ceremony began, there was no music. No introduction. One of the officials stepped forward and thanked everyone for attending. He spoke about tradition, about sacrifice, about remembering the cost of survival. Then he gestured toward the covered structure. The tarp was pulled away. At first, people thought it was part of the show. A replica, maybe. Some kind of historical display. It was a pit. Not deep enough to fall into by accident, but deep enough that once someone was inside, they wouldn't climb out easily. Inside the pit were symbols carved into the stone. Old ones. The kind you don't see in textbooks, only in strange marginal notes and half-forgotten folklore. Around the edge were hooks embedded in the rock, rusted from age but still solid. That was when the first person tried to leave. A woman toward the back turned around, saying she felt sick. She took a few steps up the path before two uniformed officers appeared from the tree line and blocked her way. No explanation. No argument. Just a quiet shake of the head. People laughed nervously. Someone clapped, thinking this was interactive theater. Then one of the officials said something that didn't sound scripted at all. "Phones down," he said. "This part isn't meant to be recorded." A few people ignored him. They raised their phones anyway. That's when the lights went out. Not all at once. One side of the quarry went dark first, then the other. The lanterns flickered, dimmed, and died, plunging the crowd into near-total darkness. From inside the pit, something moved. It wasn't large. That was almost worse. A low shape shifted against the stone, making a sound like fingernails scraping rock. A few people screamed. Others froze, unable to see enough to understand what they were looking at. Then the chanting started. It didn't come from the pit. It came from all around the quarry. Voices joined in, steady and practiced, speaking words no one recognized but somehow understood were instructions. The creature, if it was a creature, responded. It lifted its head just enough for the nearest lantern to catch its face. Human. Almost. Close enough that several people recognized features that looked familiar. A mouth shaped like it had once spoken real words. Eyes that reflected light the wrong way. Panic erupted instantly. People tried to rush the path they'd come down. Others pushed toward the rope lines. Someone tripped, and when they tried to get up, they started screaming that something had grabbed their ankle. That was when the officers moved in. Not gently. Not carefully. Anyone who tried to run was restrained. Anyone who fought was taken down. Zip ties snapped tight around wrists. Phones were taken and dropped into a metal bin near the pit. The chanting grew louder. The thing in the pit began to climb. The officials watched it like this was the most important moment of their lives. Like they'd been waiting for it. Only when the creature reached the edge did the chanting stop. The head official raised his hand. The lights came back on. And just like that, it was over. The thing retreated back into the pit, disappearing into the shadows. The officers loosened their grips. Someone announced that the ceremony was complete and thanked everyone for their cooperation. No one cheered. People were marched back up the path in small groups. Police vans waited at the road. Names were taken. IDs photographed. No charges were announced. No explanations were given. By morning, everyone had been released. Before each person left, they were handed a single-page document. It stated that what they had witnessed was part of a classified cultural preservation effort, protected by law. Any attempt to discuss it publicly would result in arrest under statutes most people had never heard of. Some tried anyway. One man posted a vague comment online about the quarry incident. It vanished within minutes. His account was deleted by the end of the day. He never mentioned it again. Others stayed silent out of fear. Years later, people who attended still refused to talk about it in detail. They'll say it was disturbing. They'll say they signed something they shouldn't have. A few will admit they still have nightmares about chanting voices and stone scraping sounds. The town still holds the festival. The Heritage Walk is still optional. And every 10 years, officials quietly make sure the crowd is just large enough. Because according to the oldest version of Greyhaven's founding story, the one kept out of the pamphlets, the town didn't survive its first winter by chance. It survived because it made an agreement, and agreements like that need to be renewed, even if everyone involved is arrested, sworn to silence, and told to forget. Because whatever lives in that pit doesn't forget at all.